Way for us to get started. So thinking
Yes.
about celebrating Women's History Month, I feel like at PAFA, we're always celebrating women. But it's especially nice during this month to have such a fabulous scholar talking about such an amazing female artist. So I wanted to welcome everyone to another Art at Noon today on Hung Liu. And I wanted to respectfully acknowledge that our institutional host, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, is on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in Pennsylvania continues to this day. I also wanted to thank the folks that make free programs like this happen here at PAFA. The spring Art at Noon lectures are supported by the Leftco family in memory of a beloved member of the docent corps, Mildred T. Leftco. And just a couple of things before we get started. I know I see so many familiar faces. This is our thousandth Zoom, but for anybody who's new joining us for the first time today, we are going to be recording today's program. So as you notice, it's recording now, and I'll be sharing it on PAFA's YouTube channel later. So link to that soon, or if you want to see our library of programs, I would direct you there to see a lot of another amazing female scholars talking about other artists. Our great speaker is going to be sharing her screen and presenting, and we will have time at the end for questions. So, please feel free to share thoughts, resources. I'll be dropping some links to recordings about the artist as well in our chat. So feel free to drop that in, but know that we'll have time at the end for that. Other than that, if anyone has any questions, also feel free to put those in. I'm now going to be handing things over to our special guest who's already been speaking, our Vice President of Museum Research and Scholarship, the Kenneth R. Woodcock Curator of Historic American Art, and the Director for the Center of for the Study of the American Artist, Dr. Anna Marley. Welcome. So good to have you.
Thank you, Abby. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We're so thrilled to have you here with us. This is one of our penultimate programs for Women's History Month. And as Abby says, we are always celebrating women at PAFA. In fact, the current exhibition that we have on view, Women in Motion, 150 Years of Women's Artistic Networks, tells the story of the fact that PAFA has been exhibiting the work of women artists since our first annual exhibition in 1811, which is a pretty remarkable history. Also, last call, our amazing exhibition, Joan Simmel's Skin in the Game, closes after this weekend. So if you're in the Philadelphia area and haven't seen the Joan Simmel show yet, please come. So I would like to, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Dorothy Moss to you all. Dorothy has been, as I was saying when we came in, someone I have looked up to and admired for the past 20 years. She is a unbelievably generous scholar and truly kind person who I have grown up with as a scholar. From thinking about tableau vivants in the 19th century to working with Amy Sherrod to commission the portrait of Michelle Obama. Dorothy's career has been remarkable. So I'm going to introduce Dorothy, and then she is going to talk to us about another remarkable woman, Hung Liu. So Dorothy Moss is the curator of painting and sculpture at the National Portrait Gallery. Moss directed the 2013, 2016, and 29 Outwin Buchever competitions, and her current and upcoming exhibitions include Hung Liu, Portraits of Promised Land, with a beautiful catalog published by Yale University Press. She is also working on One Life, Maya Lin, which is coming in 2022, and Kinship 2022, which she is co-curating with another good friend, Leslie Urena, Tina Caragol, and Robin Elson. Her past exhibitions include Sweat of Their Faces, Portraying American Workers, which she co-curated with David Ward. And I'm thrilled to say that PAFA was a major lender to that exhibition, and it was a remarkable exhibition. One Life, Sylvia Plath, which she curated in 2017. In 2015, Moss initiated the Portrait Gallery's first performance art series, Identify, which is an ongoing series of 10 commissioned performances by internationally recognized artists. And she's had some Philadelphia-based artists work with her, and I'm thrilled to say that I've seen some of those remarkable performances in the historic space at the National Portrait Gallery, which are incredibly moving. She also is the author of the Obama portraits and was instrumental in working with Amy Sherrod to bring the portrait of Michelle Obama to the National Portrait Gallery. So I hope you can see that Dorothy is a remarkable scholar whose work veers from the 19th century to work that was created yesterday and work that will be created tomorrow. So please join me in welcoming Dorothy Moss.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's so wonderful to see so many friends here. I really appreciate your taking your lunch break with me to learn about the exhibition Hung Liu Portraits of Promised Lands. Can everybody see my slides? Great. Well, it was the privilege of a lifetime to work closely with Hung Liu, who many of you know passed away from pancreatic cancer in August. She was diagnosed very late, and so when she found out her diagnosis, she only had a few weeks to live. And I was able to go to California and spend her last week with her. At that time, we were installing the exhibition. And so I was able to bring photographs of the installation and show her what her portrayals of refugees and migrant workers, of vulnerable women such as prostitutes, orphans, and other people who have been mainly marginalized in history. I was able to show her the power of that work in the spaces of the National Portrait Gallery. And our art handlers made some wonderful videos installing the work. So she was able to get a sense in that last week of what the exhibition would be like. And she was even making slight changes to the wall text at that point. So her mind was sharp, and she was always a very courageous person. And she left peacefully, but I feel so privileged to have had the opportunity to work with her for about 4 years on this exhibition, and to get to know her personally as a great artist and a dear friend. I wanted to give you a sense, this talk will really be more about the curatorial behind the scenes of this exhibition, putting it together with Hung Liu and how it fits strategically into a broader curatorial program that I've been working towards. We have been collecting significant work by women artists and representations of women for the past 10 years very rigorously. And I'm showing you an example of one of these acquisitions. This is a painting called Orange Disaster, which is a riff on Warhol by the artist Deb Cass, who is based in New York. It's a portrait of Linda Knocklin. And this portrait was displayed in our first floor lobby recently. And I really think that this painting sets the tone for what we've been doing in terms of exhibitions and commissions to make women's contemporary experience and history more visible throughout the museum. As Anna mentioned, I curated a show on Sylvia Plath that focused on her visual identity and the way she shaped her identity, not only through her own artwork, but through photographs of her as she became famous and came of age as a writer. And then I work on commissions of new portraits for the collection, including Amy Sherrod's portrait of Michelle Obama, which was a remarkable portrait to witness as it came into being. I don't think I'll ever experience watching an iconic portrait come into being again, who knows? But this certainly is iconic. And now, as you might know, these portraits are traveling across the country. They've just left the High Museum in Atlanta and will be on view in early April at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts. And then from there, we'll travel to San Francisco, to the De Young and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And I have an upcoming exhibition about Maya Lin and the influences that shaped her as an artist and an architect from the time she was very young, growing up in rural Ohio. And I'm hoping to show how her early influences manifest in her work about civil rights, the environment, and human rights. So that opens in September. This is me with Hung Liu in her studio in Oakland in 2017. I first got to know Hung Liu when she was a juror for the National Portrait Gallery's triennial Outwin Buchiver portrait competition. On that jury was Alex Soth, the photographer, and Rick Powell, the art historian and artist. And I was so struck listening to the jurors talk about their concept of portraiture. And I was particularly enchanted with the way Hung Liu spoke about art. She taught for many years at Mills College. And so as a teacher, she was very incisive about the way she critiqued work. And I wanted to get to know her better, and I wanted to understand more about how she approaches portraiture through appropriating historic photographs. So she invited me to her studio, and I was able to spend a day with her looking at her painting and talking about her practice. And I thought to myself that this would be a remarkable exhibition for the Portrait Gallery. It's also important to show women artists' work in their lifetime. And she was at the height of her career. So for all of you curators out there, do not delay showing or organizing work about living women artists. It was a chance for me to understand through her eyes the history of the Cultural Revolution in China. She spent 36 years of her life in China and 36 years in the United States. She described herself as a Chinese artist in America, not a Chinese American artist, but a Chinese artist working in America. And her work really dives into the history of China, as well as more recently, the United States through her appropriations and translations of Dorothy Lang's photographs during the Great Depression. The way that I thought we should organize this exhibition to ground it in portraiture was through biography, as well as a look at her approach to art making. She studied with Alan Capro at the University of California at San Diego in the mid-'80s. She was also highly influenced by Maura Roth, the feminist theorist. And her approach to art making shifted at that time from a socialist realist aesthetic, which was her training in China, very much propagandistic art making, to a more conceptual approach. And I grounded her understanding of portraiture in these early works in the hallway that were made during the Cultural Revolution. Her family were educators and scholars. And during the Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong sent Red Guards into the homes of educated people in China and removed family photographs and journals to take away any trace of their privileged lives. And so Hung Liu experienced this erasure, but she also made art and took photographs as almost a form of resistance. And when she was sent out into the fields outside of Beijing for proletarian re-education, she took with her a camera that had been given to her by a friend. And she secretly made photographs of the villagers and peasants around her. And these two photographs you see on the left are photographs that she made during the Cultural Revolution. And then the three drawings that you see are sketches that she made of the villagers when they would have to gather together to listen to Mao Zedong on a loudspeaker. And she talked with me about this art making, this practice of making portraits and listening to the stories of other people as her way of renewing her strength. She was forced to work in the fields continuously for 4 years consecutively, and her only way of gathering strength and resting was through making portraits. In the first gallery, I have installed portraits of her family members as well as self-portraits. And I thought it was important in the context of the National Portrait Gallery to begin with these and to ground her work in a more traditional notion of portraiture. However, you'll see in the scale of her canvases and the way that they become sculpture, she called the cutout canvases shaped canvases, she was constantly experimenting and pushing the boundaries. I like to think of her artwork as performance, and the fact that she studied with Alan Capro really lends itself to that idea. I also included photographs that she saved from albums when they were being removed from the family by the Red Guards and carried with her throughout her life. These were precious photographs that show her as a child with her family members. And here you see her grandfather, her grandmother on either side of her, her mother in the center, and her aunt. Her father is missing from these photographs because he was removed from the family in 1948 when she was an infant during the Civil War in China, when the communists invaded her hometown in the northeast of China. And he was a captain in the Nationalist Army, and he was removed and imprisoned. So she grew up without her father. She was very close with her mother, who you see here. And her mother made it a tradition for the family to go to photographer studios to have formal portraits made. And so Hung Liu developed a relationship with photography early on in her life. And you'll see how tiny these are. She would talk to me about how ubiquitous photographs of family members are today. We carry them on our iPhone in our pocket and have them in frames in our home. But for her, these are rare, precious objects. Her father, who was removed from the family in 1948, was reunited with Hung Liu in 1994 when she was living in California, and she received a phone call from a friend who said her father had been located in a camp for former inmates in China. So she traveled back to China and found him, and it happened to be on Father's Day when they were reunited. This is the portrait that she made to commemorate that reunion, and you can see this photograph that it's based on. I mentioned the cutout canvas. This was a strategy Hung Liu used to bring the subject closer to the viewer, to remove the subject from any time and context and bring them directly into our space. She also included architectural elements, and this was common in her practice of including architectural elements from Chinatown in San Francisco, and this would add a layer of time and history to the composition. Hung Liu was a scholar and student of history, and I love the fact that she described history as a verb. She said, history is a verb, it is constantly flowing forward. And she references the passage of time through the dripping effect that you'll see on some of her canvases. And you could see it here on the face, on her face and over her hands. Her husband, the art critic and curator, Jeff Kelly, coined the term weeping realism to describe what the generous amounts of linseed oil did over the paint. Her practice was very thoughtful. Everything has meaning except for the drips where she would let the canvas perform itself. She would describe this as gravity being her partner. And you'll see in the drips that there's so much emotion. It's like a veil of tears or a veil that references the passage of time and the play of history and memory over her paintings. Here she is. This is around 1990 when she had finished studying with Alan Capro. You'll see her husband, art critic Jeff Kelly, on the right, and Alan Capro is in the jacket. this time in her life was very important in terms of the creative energy that she got in California, and the experimental nature of her fellow classmates and her mentors. She told a story about how Alan Capra once took her class to a dump and said, make something. And she was so shocked and sort of overwhelmed by this assignment because she was used to socialist realist training in China. And the fact that art could be anything was radical, and really opened up her way of thinking about what art can be. From there, she created this incredible, iconic self-portrait titled Resident Alien. And this was made while she was she had finished graduate school and she was in a residency at the Cat Street Project in San Francisco. She always thought it was odd that immigrants in this country are labeled as aliens on green cards. And that feeling of being both an insider and an outsider haunted her. So she made this portrait, self-portrait about that. And you can see her sense of humor, but also her very critical approach to commenting on the way immigrants are treated in this country. She's changed her name to Fortune Cookie. She's changed her birth year to 1984, which is the year she arrived in California, reversing the 4 and the 8 of her birth year. In this portrait of her grandmother, which is monumental, 99 by 55 inches, she focused on her grandmother's hands. And she talked about the fact that her hands were swollen and arthritic from years of washing the family's clothes by hand and taking care of everything in the household. She wanted the visitor or the viewer to look up to this monumental work, this very sculptural work, as if we were looking up at our own family members, at our own elders. She believed in a common humanity, in a shared family, and she wanted the portraits of her family members to remind her visitors, her viewers, of their own family and the generations that have cared for us over time. She has inscribed on the blouse of her grandmother the Chun Mountain, which is a mountain where there are a lot of monasteries and convents, and her grandfather was a scholar of the mountain and those convents, and later posthumously she published his research on Chun. And you'll see his portrait through the doorway. It's a beautiful portrait that belongs to the SF MoMA. In the second gallery, I focused on gender and the way that Hung Liu, there's some marking on the screen, I don't know what that is, but the way that Hung Liu addressed portrayals of women. And in this gallery, you'll see portraits that she made based on photographs of women prostitutes and let me move to this slide, and women with bound feet. This is a portrait that she made titled Goddess of Love, Goddess of Liberty, based on a photograph of a woman with bound feet that was probably sold to a client. And she was so disturbed by this image and the fact that when she made it, Tiananmen Square, the massacre of Tiananmen Square was unfolding. She was living in Texas, and she was very upset by the fact that this violence was happening in her home country. And she made this work of art, which consists of 2 panels. On the left, you see a vase that's in a French collection. And to comment on the fact that women are bound, women in China are contained vessels, she included a broom to reference the way the Chinese government swept away the blood from Tiananmen Square after the massacre of the students who protested there, and then a chalkboard with erasure marks to reference the erasure of history. I have no idea what that mark on the screen is, but I'll just keep going. This is another painting in that gallery that is titled Madonna. And this is a painting based on a photograph of a Chinese prostitute that Hung Liu found in a film archive in Beijing when she returned to China for the first time after she immigrated to the United States. She was so surprised to find this archive of photographs of prostitutes and saddened by the practice of women being sold through photographs that are highly staged. And so she made a series of paintings that give life back to these women, that give them dignity and honor by setting them in beautiful compositions that include gold leaf and architectural elements. In this case, the woman is gazing directly at the viewer, and she's in this beautiful space that looks almost like a reliquary, as if to say she's now protected, she's untouchable. In the corridor leading down the hallway, I've installed two different series across from each other, two very different series. This one is titled Where is Mao? And these are charcoal drawings on canvas. This series belongs to the Denver Art Museum. And in this series, Hung Liu was looking back from her position in the United States as a recent immigrant on her experience in China, and making drawings based on photographs of Mao that circulated in the mass press. And many of these photographs, he's with world leaders. These are images that were well known in China, and she does not include the facial features of Mao. Instead, she has erased his features because she said that everybody would recognize him. Everyone would know who he is by the shape of his head. And by erasing his facial features, she said she was creating an anti-monument with this series. The series that's installed across the hallway is a very different series. These are jewel-like paintings of orphans in an Episcopal missionary orphanage in modern-day Wuhan. Hung Liu came across this image of these orphans in a book called The Awakening of China that was published in 1907 by W.A.P. Martin. And she was so saddened to see how sullen these little children looked, where they should be at a time in life to experience joy and freedom. They look like captives, and she wanted to free them of their sorrow by making portraits of them where she separates them into small groups or individual figures and adds symbols such as the circle, which to her was a symbol of transience and wholeness and hope. And you see the circle appear in much of her work throughout her career.
Dorothy, do you mind if we stop your share and share it again?
Not at all. Let's see if we can get that mark away.
I'll stop.
Okay. Let me try again. Okay. Okay. So you see how just absolutely exquisite these canvases are. The next gallery is devoted to Hung Liu's portrayals of refugees and displaced women. As I mentioned, in 1948, there was a civil war happening in China that forced Hung Liu's family to flee their hometown of Chun. And during that time, her mother carried her to safety. And when Hung Liu was around 8 years old, she asked her mother about that experience. And her mother told her the story of seeing another mother put an infant down on a riverbank and walk into the river and drown herself. And Hung Liu asked her mother if she would have ever considered doing that herself. And the answer was, I don't know. Her mother said, I don't know. And that haunted her. So she, throughout her career, was drawn towards images of refugee mothers and children because she was once one of them. And I can't help but see in the images that are coming from Ukraine, Hung Liu's subjects. These are the people that she cared most about and wanted us to be mindful of and to activate around them. She was very much an activist. Hung Liu often talked about her form of feminism as coming from China. And while she was adopted by American feminists and asked to speak in San Francisco at the 2017 Women's March, where she shared a stage with Joan Baez, and she taught at Mills College for many years and studied with Maura Roth, she described her feminism as being grounded in the strength of her mother and her grandmother, and in the stories she read from ancient Chinese poetry and literature, such as the Ballad of Mulan, which she read frequently with her father and memorized. So Hung Liu's approach to portraying women and children was very much grounded in her family's history and experience, and in literature about the bravery of women in China. As her career developed over the years, she would constantly push herself and look for more archival documents and images to interpret and work with. And her final body of work led her to the Oakland Museum of California's Dorothy Lang archive, which was not far from her studio. As she was a student of history, she was curious to learn more about the Great Depression through Dorothy Lang's work for the WPA. And she related the experience of Dorothy Lang's subjects to her own experience as a mother. And here she is with her son, Ling Chen Kelly, whose portrait you see here. That's in that gallery with her family members' portraits. And she also related the experience of Dorothy Lang subjects to Chinese refugees and to her own experience as a laborer during the Cultural Revolution. And here is a picture of her during that time. She took photographs, as you noted at as we have installed that early corridor. And those photographs directly relate, in my mind, to Dorothy Lang's work. She often thought about herself in making the portraits based on Dorothy Lang's photographs as honoring Dorothy Lang, but also reinvigorating and honoring her subjects, especially the children, the women, and the young girls. I'm very proud to say that we were able to honor one of Hung Liu's last wishes, which was for the Smithsonian to acquire her final 2 self-portraits. In 2008, Hung Liu started a series called the Rat Year series, which is a series of portraits that look at her life during each rat year. 1948 is a rat year. So every year on her birthday, beginning in 2008, she made a series of paintings about that year. And these are the final 2 self-portraits she made. The one on the left is titled The Last Dandelion. It was created before she had been diagnosed with cancer, but she knew her health was failing. And you see on the right panel this strong image of the last seed of a dandelion, and she's facing forward bravely, wearing her mask. She was very concerned about the isolation that we were all experiencing during the pandemic, and but she's facing forward bravely. And then on the right, you see her self-portrait titled Counting Down, where she's incorporated ancient Chinese characters that reference the feeling of isolation, of kicking the wall. And then she's wrapped herself in a scarf that has the motif of an American flag. And you'll see at the right corner that she's literally showing counting down as if she's in a jail cell, counting the days. The final year was difficult, not only because of COVID and isolation, but also because of various health challenges that she experienced before her diagnosis. So these 2 self-portraits reference those challenges, but I think they also reference her strength and her resilience, and the reminder that she's left all of us to be resilient, to notice those who are most vulnerable, to treat history as a verb, which I love because she wanted us to recognize that history can always be rewritten. History can always be opened up. and more, there's room for more stories. There's room to uncover those stories in archives. I'm also very happy that right now her husband, Jeff Kelly, is in discussions with the Archive of American Art about potentially placing her archive with the Smithsonian, which will be a great gift to scholars and students, because there is so much more that can be done with her story and with her work, and so much more inspiration for scholars and artists in her. So thank you. I will stop there and open up some time for questions.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. That was fantastic. We have some time, everyone, so please feel free to drop things in the chat, or also if you want to ask a question verbally, if you don't mind just raising your hand using the participant button where it says raise hand, or on the side by the chat, or wave us down and we will find you. Yeah, so much to process with that show. Such an amazing journey.
Well, and I'll just say that the process of proposing an exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery involves a lengthy write-up of the exhibition and how it will fit within our broader strategic plan, and our how it will complement other exhibitions at the time and the collection. And I do think that this exhibition is particularly important in terms of thinking about what portraiture is. Hung Liu's approach is conceptual, and she uncovers the stories of people who have been left out of history. She rewrites history, and she does so on monumental scale. And I think it's really important, especially for students, to think broadly about what portraiture can do, what it can be, the activist elements of portraiture, and the importance of representation.
No, completely. Yeah, it was amazing to see the scale of them and everything that she's doing with portraiture. And we're getting so much feedback in the chat. We have a question, but I see Anna Marley's hand. Anna, feel free. I will, hold on one second. Go for it, Anna.
Thanks, Dorothy. You know, I was lucky enough to see the exhibition in person in DC, and something I was struck by was, I can't remember if I had heard you say this or I read this in a label, but just thinking about the placement of this exhibition and this emphasis on immigrants, and particularly women and refugees, the fact that how happy Hung Liu it was that it was at the National Portrait Gallery, you know, not very far away from the US Capitol, you know, and just thinking about the real importance and almost revolutionary quality of having this show in the middle of Washington, DC. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. That must be.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Anna. The National Portrait Gallery is a museum of art history and biography. So we add a kind of a different context to what the work we show than a pure art museum might. And because we have a full collection of the America's presidents' portraits, and we tell the history of the United States through portraiture, our curators are working very hard to address missing narratives and absences. And Hung Liu's, it's interesting that you use the word, I don't know if you said radical or something, but she was very much of a renegade and a path breaker. She was censored in China in 2019. I was supposed to travel with her to her exhibition that was planned for the UCCA in Beijing, major contemporary art center. And the government did not give her work the permits to enter China. And she was very upset by this. A lot of her supporters circled around her and gave her an uncensored party outside of San Francisco on the day that the exhibition would have opened. She said she couldn't really understand why she was seen as dangerous by the government, but in a panel discussion that I did with the director of the UCCA, Phil Tenari, he believes the reason her work is seen as dangerous in contemporary and current day China, which is a very different China than 10 years ago, was because she never completely abandoned socialist realist painting. She makes figures on a monumental scale, yet she imbues them with pathos. She shows the suffering, she represents the struggle, and that's where the danger lies. It's not at all, they can, Bill Tenari said they can show Warhol, they can show Jeff Koons, they can show a lot of contemporary art that's unusual or that might be seen as conceptual, but when it comes to human suffering, there's danger in that. So I tried to tell her that it just makes her that much more powerful to be someone, a dangerous woman, but still it didn't ease her mind when she wanted to return to China and was not allowed.
Thank you for that, Dorothy. And I see we have another hand. Rami, I'm going to ask one question from the chat just so folks don't think we've forgotten, and then we'd love to hear from you. So Sarah says that they're fortunate enough to own a portrait of two young boys with birds, and asking if you could speak to the symbolism of birds in Hung Liu's work specifically.
Yes, she often incorporated imagery of cranes and other birds that appear in ancient Chinese painting into her work. And she called these symbols of blessings. Birds fly away and migrate and find new homes and are able to take root in multiple places. For her, birds were symbols of hope. And as she layered symbols on top of her subjects, such as the circle, butterflies, birds, she was offering blessings for the journey of her subject. It's almost like she's giving them, she said she was giving them a proper burial by making her paintings.
Yeah, and I have a direct message asking someone specifically if you'd expand on circles in her work. So on transience and hope.
Yes, she was a Tao Buddhist. And she said in her last days that she had become more and more religious as her life on earth waned. And the circle was almost like a punctuation mark at the end of the painting. Again, it's transience and wholeness. And Chinese writing, she taught me that the end of a sentence contains a circle, and it's not necessarily the end of the sentence, it's the beginning of the next sentence. So it's got that element of punctuation and renewal simultaneously.
Thank you. And Rami, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, Dorothy.
Hi,
It's so good to
Rami.
see you. Thank you so much for this wonderful overview. I cannot wait to see the show. I've heard such extraordinary things and it looks stunning. And I just was intrigued. I think I heard you correctly saying that, this obviously this kind of sculptural component to these remarkable portraits, in painting, but that cutout aspect that she engages is just so interesting. And I would just love to hear more about how she came to that practice and that idea of engaging with the canvas in that way.
Yeah, I really do think it comes from training with a performance artist. It's a very physical process to sculpt, literally sculpt and shape the wooden backing and then stretch the canvas over it. And she pioneered this, and she talked to me about this practice as bringing the viewer closer to the subject, so that we feel we're in the same space, and we're not, bound by a frame necessarily, that they literally come at us. And so also by adding architectural details as installation elements, it further creates this space that encompasses both the subject and the viewer at once.
Right. Thank you so much. Yeah, they're so immersive in that way and so unique. Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for the question. I have to say, I'm very happy that Hung Liu's son is here. And Ling Chen, do you want to say anything? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm just so happy you're here. We've become close friends during the course of this exhibition. I feel we call each other rap brother and sister. So,
well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Nothing I really want to say. Thank you for your interest and patronage of Mom's work. I'm glad that her legacy has continued, and please enjoy the show. And of course, I'm no longer the 2-year-old on the ground, and my son, who is 2 years old, looks surprisingly like me back then. So you get a glimpse into the family history as well. And thank you for having me. I didn't prepare anything, so I return everything to my rat sister, the expert, and head lecturer. Thank you, Dorothy.
thank you, Elsie.
That's wonderful to have you here with us, especially with so much of family being a huge part of the exhibition and her work. I was wondering, Dorothy, if you could speak. I was really struck by what you said about how Hung Liu thought of herself as a Chinese artist in America and sort of the split. I just finished a book, Penchinko, about what it was like being Korean living in Japan, and sort of that mixture of not feeling like you belong in either place. And when you're talking about her work being censored in Beijing, I wonder if you could expand on her relationship with her identity, maybe towards the later end of her life when she was working with you.
Well, I think she very much embraced her Chinese identity and the experiences she had there, even the ones that were traumatic. She was, as you could see, close to her family and very inspired by her grandfather and her mother and her grandmother. And I do think that she strove to create a body of work that projects a community of humankind without borders. The artist Enrique Chagoya described her as borderless. And so while she called herself a Chinese artist in America, I think she saw herself in a way like the birds in her paintings and the dandelions. She often incorporated the symbol of the dandelion as a migratory seed that takes root and grows as it travels. Somebody who defied borders and defied cultural identities in some ways in order to show the strength of what it is to be one, to really, and she, I think the term empathy can be overused, but she did describe her practice as empathetic. She wanted us to see each other through her work.
Thank you. And we have a question from Barbara in the chat. This may seem like an odd question. I don't think it seems odd to me. But do you think the artist thinks of her own work as portraiture? Like, we know that where it's being shown is curatorially seen as this, but is that how the artist felt about it as well?
Yes, that's a great question. This came up when I was proposing the exhibition, which is partly why I organized the exhibition to begin with those photographs that she made of the villagers during the Cultural Revolution and the drawings, and then the installation of family portraits. She did describe her work of anonymous subjects as portraits, and what she was hoping to do is take the anonymity away, sort of honor them, not as lost souls, which is a term she used, but as individuals. So she did use the word portraiture in describing her work. Now, I had to carefully select this show to make it work in the National Portrait Gallery, because I think some of her work is more portrait-like than others. And as you could probably tell looking at the slides of the installation, or if you've been in our building, it's the third oldest building in Washington, and it can be hard to work with large scale contemporary art in these spaces. So it was a challenge to come up with just the right selection, but we chipped away at it, and she pushed back and wanted to add more, and we negotiated, and I think we came to a wonderful selection that really reveals the depth of her practice, but the way that she approached her art making as portraiture.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
have another question after you do the one in the chat, Abby.
Oh, yes. It's less of a question, more of someone who shared their story, which thank you so much for that. But we've got a comment here that says, what an amazing body of work. I'm so happy to see an Asian woman being recognized and celebrated. As an Asian Trinidadian born woman, I can somewhat relate to her journey since my dad was forced to leave China during the revolution at 14 without his family.
Wow.
Thank you. And it's wonderful. I think you also have some artwork behind you. So we have a fellow artist here. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
Yeah, I was noticing that work behind you, Chi, when it looks beautiful. And actually that sort of relates to this question, which is going to seem oddly personal, I think, Dorothy, but it's Women's History Month, and we're talking about women, and it was so wonderful to have Elsie talk about his mom. And mothers and children are such an important part of her body of work. And also when we think about Dorothy Lang, another iconic American artist, these mothers and children. And one of the reasons we're doing this, we wanted to invite you, as we have this show up with 150 years of women artists. And one of the things I think a lot about is the choices women have had to make. In the 19th century, most women artists could not have children or chose not to have children because they couldn't do it professionally. And I know, Dorothy, you're an excellent mom. And I wonder if you and Hung Liu ever talked about how being a mother affected her artwork, or just thinking about being a curator and being a mother and being a caregiver in this professional art world that we're in, as such a big part of so many women's life that we don't get to talk about in a professional setting.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Hung Liu and I often talked about my children and about her closeness with her own mother and with Ling Chen, who she very bravely left in China to pursue graduate studies. So Elsie was raised until he was 8 by his grandmother and great-grandmother, and then he joined Hung Liu. And if you can recall the painting Goddess of Love, Goddess of Liberty, that shows the woman with the bound feet. While Hung Liu was making that painting, when they were living in Texas at the time, Ling Chen was painting on the bottom of the little bowls that are installed in front of the two panels. So he watched her and absorbed her practice, and he's really an expert when I talk with him about how she made the work, because he was often in the studio and he knows the music she listened to. There's such a deep connection there. And I am so grateful that Hung Liu lives on through him. But Hung Liu made an effort to get to know my own children, and they visited her studio and had meals with her. And because she grew up in a family of educators, her mother was an eighth grade teacher, she was wonderful with children and wonderful in promoting creativity. And she often gave me advice when I would say that I was struggling with some aspect of parenting. She would often give me the advice to let the child lead, make sure that they are who they are, don't try to make them into anyone else. Because she was such a strong and fierce person, she knew how to advise others on conjuring that inner strength and nurturing that inner strength in others. And I think that's probably what I miss the most about her, is that nurturing nature, but also that advocacy for other women, advocacy for herself, which was amazing to watch and inspiring to watch, and advocacy for her friends. And we had a gathering, a tribute gathering for her in November. We had this small window of time where during the pandemic, things seemed to be opening up a bit, and we were able to have this event. And the amount of people who came from California, who flew across the country, some people came from China, from Europe to celebrate her, spoke volumes to me about what she meant to them as a friend. She was really a beautiful friend to people. But her role as a mother was something that made her very proud. And she was able to meet her grandson, Casimir, in the May before she passed away. So she was able to have that time and celebrate his first birthday with him. So thank you for asking that, Anna.
Yeah, thank you. I can't think of a better question or a better way to end on that beautiful story and friendship and women supporting women. And I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Dr. Dorothy Moss for being here with us, and everyone for tuning in and celebrating the amazing artwork of Hung Liu.
Oh, thank you all. Thank you, Abby, and thank you, Anna, and to the wonderful supporters and staff of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. You are dear to my heart. You've made loans possible, and you bring so much inspiration. And Anna, congratulations on your current exhibition and all the work that you've done. So thank you. And thank you all for being
so
here.
much.
Yeah.
And, you know, we often let people unmute themselves in this last minute. And so you can say goodbye. Have a great day.
Thank
you for
you.
being with us.
Thanks, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.